So I think that one of the obvious things that Trump and Putin would discuss in terms of development and investments, and this is the one thing that may be predictable about Trump, is that he'll be keen for Russian investments into the United States. Because remember, he wants to reindustrialize the United States. He wants to make America great again. And everywhere he goes, he is practically shaking everybody down to invest in the United States. You know, the Middle Eastern nations, trillions of dollars, Europe, $600 billion. I'm sure that he will probably pitch the idea to Russians that they can invest their frozen assets in the United States. From the Russian point of view, this is practically a brilliant investment into improving their relations and bolstering economic cooperation.
Monaco 64, home of alternative economics and contrarian views. Today I have the pleasure of speaking with Alex Krainer. He's founder of Krainer Analytics, iSystem Trend Following, and he's author of Alex Kreiner's Trend Following Bible, Mastering Uncertainty and Grand Deception, which apparently has been banned. And you can find him on X at Naked Hedgie, and he's also on Substack. Welcome back, Alex.
Thank you, Mario. Good to join you once more.
Yeah, great to talk with you again as well. And you wrote something exactly a week ago about the significance of Alaska. And by that, of course, I mean the summit between President Trump and President Putin. So what I wanted to ask you, aside, maybe you can summarize that article you wrote a week ago, but things might have changed now depending on what you think went on there. So yeah, could you give us your like bird's eye view of what's going on? Of course, they're meeting today in the White House. The Zelensky and the Europeans are desperate to get to Trump. So yeah, we're speaking before that meeting on August 18th.
Well, as it happens, I still agree with what I wrote before the summit took place. And I think it's very significant also from the point of view that the fact that they met in Alaska, which was apparently the idea came from the Trump side, I think that that should later rest all of those, let's say, unfavorable interpretations of Trump and his government, which many have adopted, which they believe that Trump has no clue and that they're just like a chaos-driven administration, that they're making it up as they go along or reacting. I think that this should be a strong indication that they actually have a pretty good idea of what they're doing, what they intend to do. And the symbolism of Alaska proves that. Alaska used to be Russia. Alaska is where Russia and the United States physically connect. They share a border and where they could physically connect. And this is a project that's been alive at least since the time of Abraham Lincoln in 1864. And it's come back to life at various times in the past, including, I think that Trump has mentioned it, but, Vladimir Putin in 2008 or 2009 approved, when he was a prime minister, he approved a infrastructure development plan for Russia, which included bringing a railroad to Chukotka Peninsula towards the Bering Strait in such a way that it could connect to a tunnel that is, intended to be dug between the United States and Russia so that the two nations and two continents can connect physically. And in the words of FDR's vice president Wallace, this would be more than just a railway. This would be symbolic of the future of peace between the two powers. And as we know, and many people accept, today that the quality of the bilateral relationships between Russia and the United States are far and away the most important relationship for the future of peace in the world. And so, beyond this being just an economic infrastructure development project, which would be beneficial to both sides and to the world, it would be very symbolic of two superpowers joining hands and becoming connected in a physical way. This project has been derailed with almost the same fanaticism as the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. And so there are, the globalist powers, primarily the European colonialist nations, are almost hysterical about this. They don't want it to happen. In fact, they don't want the United States and Russia to have any kind of relationship. They want them to be at war. They want them to be hostile to one another. They want, at the very least, a Cold War. And so the fact that the Trump administration invited Vladimir Putin to Alaska is a very important gesture at many levels. And the way the meeting went, I think, is very encouraging in that sense. So, as I kind of expected, it doesn't seem that anything much was accomplished there. They didn't announce much, but both Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump were very positive about the meeting. Trump, in fact, said that the meeting was 10 out of 10. And Vladimir Putin he suggested that we will speak very soon and we will meet again very soon. And Putin suggested next time in Moscow. So that's all very good, And so for anybody who cares about peace in the world and who cares about future development that should be positive for humanity, should be encouraged by this meeting. I also wanted to point out that the meeting was, if you judge the meeting by the composition of their Russian and American respective delegations, you might come to the conclusion that Ukraine may have been just a side issue, not the main course. Most of the people on the delegations were people who are focused on trade and economics. You had Steve Witkoff, you had Scott Bessent on the American side, Treasury Secretary, you had Howard Lutnick, Commerce Secretary, and you on the Russian side you had Yuri Ushakov, who is Vladimir Putin's close longtime aide. You had Andrei Belousov, who is defense minister, but his specialty is economics. You had Silvanov, the finance minister, Kirill Dmitriev, who is the head of the Russian Direct Investment Fund, and you had a Russian ambassador to the United States. The person, nobody on either side is particularly focused in their expertise on Ukraine, and so nobody on U.S. delegation is a Russia or Ukraine specialist, and on the Russian side, the person who was notably absent was Vladimir Medinsky, who is Russia's chief negotiator for Ukraine, which to my mind suggests that the two powers already came to an agreement regarding Ukraine, at least in broad brushes, and that the actual objective of their discussions was much broader than just discussing peace in Ukraine. I think it'll take time for us to find out, but that's my reading of the situation. And unfortunately, they didn't give us much, so we're obliged to guess in part.
Before we proceed with the interview, I want to talk a little bit about our sponsor today, UPDF. PDFs can be frustrating to work with. They're large, not optimized for phone screens, and most of all, they're difficult to edit. Editing a PDF usually requires specialized software that can be costly and hard to learn how to use. With UPDF, editing PDFs has never been easier or cheaper. For 1/6 of the price of Adobe Acrobat, UPDF is usable on all platforms: Mac, Windows, iOS, and Android. And one account is usable on up to 4 devices with up to 100 gigabytes of cloud storage. Whether you're a professional or a general user, UPDF has a multitude of features to streamline how we interact with PDFs. Editing is easy. You can delete, add, and change text, images, hyperlinks, and watermarks, just like you would with a Word document. And you can combine and split PDFs to better organize your work. It's also easy to annotate and mark up the important parts of your documents and leave sticky notes for others to read. So I'll give you a very brief example. Even I was able to download very easily a UPDF editor and on my MacBook Pro laptop. So let's quickly go through just a little task here. So here's the UPDF editor. Let's click on this document here, open this file. I took this from the US Treasury Department. Let's click on edit. So here you go. You can move the picture from on the file. You can make it smaller or bigger, and you can even go here and change what's written on it. You could put USA. So just very easy. And if I can do it, you can do it too. UPDF is AI integrated, providing you a fast and efficient experience. UPDF's AI assistant can summarize, explain, translate, and proofread the contents of your PDFs, and can even turn them into inspiring mind maps. And you can easily convert a PDF into any file you like: Word, PowerPoint, Excel, text. UPDF can do it. Don't just take my word for it. Try UPDF for yourself and discover all these features and more. Click the link below to get an exclusive discount. Interesting you mentioned that the colonial powers of Europe are going to be very much against this. And in your article, you mentioned Lyndon LaRouche. And I remember listening to him years ago saying how they could basically break the power of the city of London through having this tunnel or bridge between the far east of Russia and Alaska through the Bering Strait, because that would, don't know if you agree, but that would basically wreck Mackinder's theory that he who controls the world island controls the world, because North America wouldn't be an island anymore. It would be connected to Eurasia via that tunnel. So yeah, I find that very interesting, and it's no surprise that Keir Starmer and all the other European leaders are so desperate to meet Trump and probably stop him from becoming, I don't know, becoming friends with Russia, because that would be a really, yeah, like you said, they don't want that. And one question I have for you, it might be jumping the gun, but I think it's really important, because I actually watched a video you put on X, and it's from 2007, and it's Putin's speech at the Munich conference, security conference. It was a great speech, I thought. But in it, he mentions the unipolar world and also multipolar world. And nowadays, those terms are being used a lot more, especially multipolar world with BRICS. But my question is, do you think Alaska is the beginning of the end for the unipolar world and the beginning of the multipolar world? Basically, because it seems to me with Trump's body language and how things went there, that he's being sold by Putin and the Russians that they need to work as partners and that the U.S. can't dictate its terms to people, to other nations around the world, i.e., they can't be a master and everyone be a servant. Just wonder what you think about that.
I think that this has been clear to Trump pretty much since the beginning or before his first administration in 2016. And as you'll recall, he has been uh, overtly favorable to improving U.S. relations with Russia, but he has been sabotaged in this and in every conceivable way. So during his first 4 years, he went through endless investigations, impeachment proceedings. Um, Everything was done to delegitimize Trump and to weaken his administration, and he has been lambasted in the media practically 24/7. And so his desire to improve U.S. relations with Russia came to not very much. And remember, the big lie was contrived that, he was Vladimir Putin's lapdog and that the Russians actually got him into the White House, the famous Russiagate affair. And I think that this time around, Trump is playing the game in a different way, which appears more chaotic because there's a lot more deception going on, a lot more psyops, a lot more misdirection of his opponents. But I don't think that this is a new thing. I think that Trump has intended this for a very long time. And I think it's not even such a radical idea because the United States and Russia used to be allies practically since the beginning of the country, since the United States was created. So they were allies during the Revolutionary War. Russia was a major ally of the United States during the Civil War, which is something that's gotten airbrushed from history. And then they were very close allies in World War II. During whole of the 19th century, the United States and Russia shared a very, very close cooperation, an alliance, and a friendship that was, by many historians regarded as practically part of the American national folklore. It was really a close relationship. And the reason for this is because the United States and Russia naturally should be allies. The hostility and divisions have been contrived artificially by the remnants of the British Empire, because what they absolutely don't want, and what they will try to derail at all cost, is the United States having close, constructive, friendly relations with Russia. It's simply the divide and conquer approach to managing the world. And the two major powers in the world, Russia and the United States, are on the top of the list of powers to divide so that you can rule the world. When you mentioned the change in what happens if the two nations connect via the Bering Strait. If you look at the map, especially if you look at from the north, from the North Pole perspective, you realize that by the United States and Russia connecting, suddenly Europe finds itself at the periphery. So Europe is no longer the center of the world. It becomes the periphery. And, this is part of the cycle of history where, the weight of the world in terms of economic development and populations, and with it, political and military power is shifting eastward. And this is a shift that cannot be stopped. So, we for the past 40 years, we had the unstoppable rise of China, which is now, one of the dominant powers in the world. You have the rise of India. So Eastern Asia is becoming practically the point of gravity in the world. And by connecting the United States and Russia, they too become part of this new center of gravity in world affairs. And so I think that this is desirable to everyone except maybe the European colonialists who see themselves sidelined. But one thing I wanted to mention with respect to to what just happened in Alaska, and this is purely a guess, but I think it's only a matter of time. And I will publish an article about this today on Substack. I suspect that one of the issues that we're going to learn about very soon is going to be the issue of Russian frozen assets, because the bulk of that money is in Europe. I think out of the estimated 300 to 335 billion dollars, only 5 to 8 billion is in the United States. Everything else is in Europe, primarily in under custody of Euroclear in Belgium. About I think about 180 billion dollars or so. Then there was supposed to be some 70 or 71 billion dollars in France. But according to the latest figure, this is only 25 billion. And I think the suspicion is that Macron's government had helped themselves to these funds already. So out of 71 billion, there's only about 25 billion left. And then I think there's about 37 billion in the UK. So I think that one of the obvious things that Trump and Putin would discuss in terms of development and investments, and this is the one thing that may be predictable about Trump, is that he'll be keen for Russian investments into the United States. Because remember, he wants to reindustrialize the United States. He wants to make America great again. And everywhere he goes, he is practically shaking everybody down to invest in the United States. You know, the Middle Eastern nations, trillions of dollars, Europe, $600 billion. I'm sure that he will probably pitch the idea to Russians that they can invest their frozen assets in the United States. From the Russian point of view, this is practically a brilliant investment into improving their relations and bolstering economic cooperation. And for the same low price, they get to deliver another humiliating kick to the Europeans. So I think that if I'm right about this, and I think I would be willing to bet money that I am, I think that we will soon learn that, Trump will issue an order for or the Russians will do so with American support to transfer the frozen assets from European custody to the American custody. And at that point, Russian frozen assets become American collateral rather than European. And the Europeans were already counting on that money being their collateral with which they will, give a boost to another major credit cycle. Emmanuel Macron has been talking about using Russian frozen assets to rebuild and reconstruct Ukraine, which would obviously be awarded to French companies and financed by French banks. And I think that if Trump and Putin get along, this will all the bottom will fall out of these plans. And I think this is part of the reason why the Europeans are so very panicked about Trump and Putin making nice with each other.
Yeah, because I think even the Germans, they're issuing a lot of debt to rebuild their military, and we're seeing now, though, the German government bond market, like especially the 30-year, drop through the floor. So maybe the markets know something, and they're thinking like you. But one question I wanted to ask you is concerning China and BRICS, because Trump was threatening Russia or Putin that if they didn't have a ceasefire or stop the war, that they would well, it was actually an indirect tariff on China for buying Russian oil, but that's been frozen, so to speak. So my question is, do you think the improving relationship between the U.S. and Russia via Trump would also mean an improving relationship with China and BRICS? Because Trump has been very aggressive about BRICS, especially right after the BRICS summit finish in Rio. He said, well, it's a little group. Most people didn't show up. And yeah, just your take on that, Alex.
The last I heard from Trump is he's not keen on any of these tariffs. That is, he's not keen on sanctioning China or Russia. And he has said that, well, if we do that, then these other countries will have to find sources elsewhere, and it's just going to make complicate things. So I think he's backing away from that, but at the same time, in true to his own style, he's leaving the door open to everything. I think this is just part of his psyops at this point because he's keeping everybody guessing and hoping that he will pivot to their side. Um, I don't think that this is going to happen. And now there was another point I wanted to make, but it just went poof. It'll come back to me and I'll get back to it.
Yeah, you were talking about the Europeans, they're very much against, especially London, against the US being very friendly with Russia. But wouldn't you say also in the US there's big opposition to that as well
Oh
via the
yes.
neocons? How do you think how much in danger are Trump's plans vis-a-vis the neocons over there?
Well, I think this is exactly the reason for this chaotic management of the situation on Trump's side, because I think that he's trying to keep everybody kind of on board, hoping that he might pivot to their side at a given moment. And we have to ask ourselves, who are the neocons? It's a relatively small group. And for the most part, they're in the academia and in the media. And you have to ask yourself, how can such a small group have such a disproportionate power in the American policies to be able to practically determine the conduct of American foreign policy? And I've noticed that there's a lot of commonalities and a lot of connections between the neocons and the London foreign policy establishment. So I have to assume that in some way they are supported by London and that that they cooperate closely together to influence the United States foreign policy. But London is now in a very, very weak position. They're practically teetering on the verge of a very significant financial crisis. The government's fiscal condition is catastrophic. I've just seen very recent figures that their tax revenues from the North Sea oil production has collapsed, among other things. A lot of those pet projects of Starmer government are turning out to be a lot more expensive than they anticipated. And so everything is kind of coming apart at the seams. And to retain control, the government is responding by increasingly heavy-handed repression. And so I think that they are losing their ability to influence foreign policy in the way that they used to. And I have to assume that in that case, the neocons' hand in the United States is also becoming proportionately weaker. And so I think that Trump is no longer as let's say, as much hostage to them as he was during his first term. And then we've also seen that he has taken precautions in Washington, D.C. by transferring the command and control of the Metropolitan Police and of the mayor to his own administration. And he brought the National Guard's troops. I think initial figures were 850 troops, but I think that that might turn out to be significantly more. And then, I think that with the passage of the Big Beautiful Bill a few weeks ago, his political support, he bolstered his political power in Washington, D.C. I suspect that the Epstein files are playing a role in this, and that the reason why they didn't turn the Epstein files public is because they chose to actually use them as a political leverage. And I think that the over time, Trump has made himself a lot more secure in Washington, D.C., and a lot more powerful. And I think that we can clearly see the difference because I think a lot of his opponents are being strangely silent these days. And, the establishment media are nowhere near as vocal in criticizing Trump as they used to be between 2016 and 2020. So I don't see that they will be able to manipulate him as easily as they did before. And I think that he will continue to be very cautious through the midterms in next year, 2026. But if he retains the House and the Senate through the midterm elections, then I think we'll see him act even more boldly and make even more radical changes in the conduct of U.S. foreign policy, but also domestic policy.
You mentioned the nexus, I guess is the word, between foreign London foreign policy and Washington foreign policy. Would you say that's the connection between the Royal Institute for International Affairs, also known as Chatham House, and the CFR in New York? Because I think the CFR was like created by the people in London. And I think it was Dick Cheney who was a member of the CFR, and he said in an interview at the CFR, he said, if my voters in, I think, I'm not sure if North Dakota, where he's from, he said, if they knew I was a member of the CFR, they wouldn't be very happy. So, yeah, I think that's what you said there is interesting, that the influence is waning. But changing subject now to more the economic and market side, because on this channel we cover that a lot as well. How do you see things going forward? First, vis-a-vis the Fed and Trump trying to get them to cut rates, and then also, what do you see are the biggest dangers to the financial market? There are a lot of people, commentators, and you know naturally saying that there's a lot of metrics out there that are pointing to a big bubble in the stock market. But as we know, Alex, markets can remain irrational for longer than you can remain solvent. It's one of the few comments that I think Keynes made that I agree with. But yeah, so what do you think about that? And also maybe touch upon precious metals and what you see going forward.
Well, when it comes to the stock markets, one thing that took me pretty much my whole career to work out is that, the stock market is driven primarily, and I would say not only primarily, but almost completely by the activities of the central banks. So if the central bank is engaged in quantitative easing, you have monetary inflation. Most of the new money ends up somehow gravitating into the stock markets. So the stock markets go up. If the central bank engages in quantitative tightening, then the market goes into a bear market. I think it's very predictable that the central bank will pursue quantitative easing and that we will see inflation in the United States, but not just the United States. The same will happen in Britain, in the EU, in Japan, and so forth. And so, while the printing presses are running hot, the stock markets are going to go up. I would remind your viewers that, for example, in 1996, when we were in the middle of the dot-com boom, in December, Alan Greenspan gave a testimony to the U.S. Senate in which he berated investors for irrational exuberance, if you'll recall. And from that moment on, the Nasdaq tripled before it peaked. And in the just last 5 months of the dot-com bubble, the Nasdaq went up 110%. So the fact that we are at peak valuations in stocks today doesn't mean that that the market will reverse and go into a crash or a bear market. But what tends to happen in these situations, and we've seen it in many historical instances before, is that stock markets not only stay in the bull market, they actually accelerate. And what I mean by these circumstances is, you have an overhang of unpayable debts. And you have two ways to deal with it, basically. One is through austerity, and the other one is through inflation, through monetary inflation. Politically, austerity is very difficult to do because it pushes the system into a recession or even a depression. And that all happens very quickly. People lose jobs, the economy grinds to a halt, and the country ends up very depressed. And not only that, it ends up producing less goods and services, which becomes a real social problem, not just economic. Whereas if you do quantitative easing, you keep covering all these bad debts with newly printed liquidity. The system can continue to function. The money loses purchasing power, but the economy continues to produce goods and services. So, if people are employed and they earn their paychecks, and there's food on the shelves, and there's fuel in gas stations, and there's medicines in the pharmacies, then the government can maneuver their way out of the crisis much more easily, and they're not the social pressures are not as acute. So it's pretty predictable that all the Western nations will manage this crisis with the central bank printing presses, and that means that inflation will go up, but it also means that the stock markets are probably going to continue going up as well, because a lot of this money, this newly printed money, ends up gravitating into the stock markets, and the financial authorities, the monetary authorities, prefer it that way because the stock markets actually absorb a lot of that liquidity, so that it kind of cushions the effect on consumer markets. So the money that goes into stocks and bonds isn't going into the consumer markets, so it slows down the impact of quantitative easing on consumer prices. Anyway, that's the answer with regards to the stock markets. But I think that inflation will still reaccelerate, and I think that primarily it'll do so on account of commodity prices. I think that we'll have a commodity price-driven inflation. We've already seen the metals go up quite significantly in the last year. Energy hasn't done pretty much anything, but I think that at a given point, oil prices might rise higher. And one of the reasons might be this, this Western, I would say British and French initiative to start attacking the Russian, shadow fleet of tankers, and we're talking about anything between 400 and 600 tankers. And I think in the last few weeks we had, if the news reports are correct, we had about three Russian tankers that were sunk or heavily damaged. And I think at some point that might start to have an impact on the prices of oil, particularly if the Russians decide to retaliate in kind. Um, that could catalyze more pressure on price inflation. And then I have to say that still most of the agricultural commodities are pretty much in a bear market. So there's no inflation coming from there, but that could change very rapidly.
Yeah, and what about the bond market? How do you see that? Because if the central banks, especially the Fed, because the Fed is still doing QT, even though it's kind of in the last month or so, it's kind of bottomed out. Do you think the bond markets, especially the longer end, would they rally? Because they seem to be under pressure right now, longer term yields.
Well, as I see it, the American bond market is less bearish than European and British. And the European and British bonds have been quite heavy of late, just maybe in the last few weeks in particular. Whereas American bonds are, I'm talking about treasuries, the government bonds. American bonds look a bit more resilient, and I've developed a trend following system, so I get the algorithms to tell me whether to be long and short, and we are heavily short European and British bonds. The US 30-year bond is kind of flatlining, so we're getting a bit whipsawed. We go long and then we go short and we get longer. But the 10-year Treasury bond has been almost on the bullish side. So we'll see. But I think that longer term, I think that bonds are definitely going to go into a bear market, that inflation rates are going to go higher. But I suspect that this will be much worse for Europe and Britain than it will be for the United States. Trump is going around the world as we spoke before, and he's getting all these countries to invest hundreds upon hundreds of billions of dollars into the United States. And I think that he's improving the American ability to finance themselves, and he's giving his government a lot of good maneuvering space to manage the crisis, including with the imposition of tariffs. And that's in fact the point that I forgot to mention a minute ago when I lost my train of thought. I think that all this war of words coming out of Trump and his administration about punishing countries with tariffs and sanctions, I think it's just um, he's just using acceptable language that is the language of sanctions to do what he intended to do anyway, and that is to impose tariffs on a lot of their trading partners, not to sanction them, not to punish them, but in order to create a protected market at home for uh, for the for the reindustrialization of the American economy. And to do that, you have to give your industries a certain protection from foreign competition, which is why he's doing it. Anyway, like long story short, I think that the situation is very tricky. I think that nobody will be spared inflation going forward. But I think that the United States might be able to engineer the softest landing of all the Western economies. Whereas I think that Europe and Britain are in really, really dire straits. And I think that particularly if the Americans and the Russians decide between them to use the frozen assets of the Russian Federation to invest them in the American economy, then that's going to be extremely bad news for the Europeans who have, I think, who already count with that being their own collateral.
Yeah, and just to finish off, one more question, and it's to do with gold. And it's a topic that's been quite popular this year. And it's not the reason why I've been buying, accumulating gold and silver. The reason I've been doing that is because, like you said, when it push comes to shove, central banks and governments, they'll keep inflating. But just want to ask your opinion on this speculation of gold revaluation by the US Treasury and the Fed?
I don't know what to think about that. I mean, I get the argument and it's very obvious and it's very compelling. I don't know how to answer the question why they didn't do that already. What is keeping them from doing that? And if I understood what was keeping them from doing it in the first place, then maybe I would know the answer as to how likely it is that they will actually uh, pull the trigger on that. But I must say I don't. So I see why they would do it. Suddenly, the supposed gold reserves held at the Fort Knox would suddenly be hundreds of times higher than what they are booked as today. That's clear, and that would be great collateral for funding reindustrialization. So it's all very obvious. So my where I'm confused is why haven't they already done that?
Yeah, that's true because the last time they did it was 1972. They revalued from 35 to 38. And then the next year in 73, they revalued it for the last time from 38 to 42.22. Maybe, well, that was right after Nixon closed the gold window and things were really bad economically. So, but since then, things have gotten bad as well before, and they'd never done it. So, yeah, I agree with you. And Alex, I wanted to thank you for your time, and I'll keep in touch. And also wanted to tell the viewers I'm going to put Alex's Substack, a link to it below in the description, so you can look into his Substack. I find it very interesting. Thank you, Alex.
Thank you, Mario. Always good to join you, and warm greetings to your viewers and listeners.
Thank you. Take care.